Hi. Thomas R Schreiner writes a chapter in Recovering Biblical Manhood and Womanhood on head coverings, particularly dealing with the text of 1 Corinthians 11, 2-16. So if you want a full detailed argument from Schreiner, you'd have to get the book. I'm only going to highlight some of the issues that I had to wrestle with, verses from that text, things that puzzled me. But first, about Brother Schreiner. At the writing of this book, he was the associate professor of New Testament at Bethel Theological Seminary. He was a graduate of Western Oregon College, Western Conservative Baptist Seminary, and Fuller Theological Seminary. And he had written a book called Interpreting the Pauline Epistles. So we're going to read the text, 1 Corinthians 11, 2-6, as it is copied in the book. It reads, I praise you for remembering me in everything and for holding to the teachings, just as I passed them on to you. Now I want you to realize that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head, and every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. It is just as though her head were shaved. If a woman does not cover her head, she should have her hair cut off. And if it is a disgrace for a woman to have her hair cut or shaved off, she should cover her head. A man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God. But the woman is the glory of man. For man did not come from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. For this reason, and because of the angels, the woman ought to have a sign of authority on her head. In the Lord, however, woman is not independent of man, nor is man independent of woman. For as a woman came from man, so also a man is born of woman. But everything comes from God. Judge for yourselves. Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? Does not the very nature of things teach you that if a man has long hair, it is a disgrace to him? But if a woman has long hair, it is her glory. For long hair is given to her as a covering. If anyone wants to be contentious about this, we have no other practice, nor do the churches of God. So, back in the day when I was rereading everything, and I read this passage, I wasn't sure what I should be doing. Should I be wearing a head covering or not? Is my hair enough as a covering? I just really wasn't sure. This didn't seem clear to me. So this is a time to get something from scholars of the text. So that's why I thought it would be good to share with you what Schreiner does in summarizing the reason for Paul even writing to the Corinthian congregation. So he makes this point. Specifically, he's going to talk about the way the verse 2 begins and its relation to the rest of what I read. So the very first verse was, I praise you for remembering me in everything and for holding to the teaching, just as I pass them on to you. That was verse 2. So here's what he says. How does verse 2 relate to the following verses? Verse 2 says, Now I praise you because you remember me in everything and hold firmly to the traditions just as I delivered them to you. The following verses, verses 3 to 16, however, do not seem to be an example of the Corinthians holding fast to the Pauline traditions. The behavior of the Corinthian women is contrary to the custom of Paul and the other churches, according to verse 16. Presumably, Paul would not instruct the Corinthians regarding proper adornment for women if they were already following his instructions in this matter. It is probably the case then that 11:2 functions as a complementary introduction before Paul begins to criticize the Corinthians on certain practices. Indeed, 11:2 is most likely the introductory statement for all the chapters 11 through 14. Even though the Corinthians are not following the traditions regarding women, the Lord's Supper, and spiritual gifts, the situation of the church is not bleak in every respect. So, just even that, putting it in its setting, remembering that Corinthians is written to a congregation that he felt compelled to write to because they did have certain practices or problems with the way they were behaving. Not just with the head coverings or the women, how they were behaving, but in the practice of the Lord's Supper and in the spiritual gifts in the congregation, causing concerns or troubles or competition. You probably very familiar with those chapters. So putting it in its setting helps you to realize there must have been a problem. So to say that, oh, well, it doesn't apply, it's there for a reason. It's in the letter for a reason. Okay. Schreiner also cautions against isolating certain verses out of the whole to determine its meaning. So I thought this was very important for me as an ex-witness because I came from a religion that made a practice of taking a single or a couple of verses out of the whole context and then making application. So that's not a good idea. This is the way he cautions on page, okay, well, I don't have to tell you the page, okay. He says, okay, where is it? There is a profound interdependence and mutuality present in the male-female relationship, and neither sex can boast over the other because the sexes are interdependent. Ultimately, everything comes from God. So the isolated verses that are sometimes taken are verses 11 and 12. He says, verses 11 and 12 demonstrate that Paul would utterly reject the notion that the women are inferior or lesser human beings. Sad to say, some traditionalists have treated women in this way. Mutuality is also an element of the relationship between men and women. Women are created in the image of God, and men have no greater worth because of their God-given responsibility to lead. At the opposite extreme, some evangelical feminists have drawn a wrong deduction from verses 11 and 12. For example, Bilezikian asserts that if Paul sees men and women as equal and both created in God's image, then any role distinction must be eliminated, because they would contradict the affirmation of equality. Such a distinctively modern way of thinking has little to do with how Paul thought. The text before us makes it plain that Paul thought role distinctions and equality are not contradictory. People can be equal in essence and yet have different functions. The fairest way to read Paul is to let his own writings strike the balance. Verses 3 to 10 make it clear that he believed in role distinctions. Verses 11 and 12 show that he did not thereby believe women were inferior or less important. Those who focus only on verses 11 and 12 effectively shut out verses 3 to 10, and it is a mistake to exclude either teaching. We must hold them together as Paul did. All right, so the next time I will share with you what Schreiner says about the meaning of the word head and also its significance for us today. How do we apply these texts to today's situation? I'm going to link to a video that David did and Douglas on the feminization of American culture, because culture is oftentimes presented as the reason why we wouldn't practice this today. And the second one is, does your Bible study cover the whole counsel of God? Protects against proof texting. Thank you for watching.